Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you might be, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. This is Making AI Work in Airports, where value is emerging and what it takes to deliver it. My name is Nick Crane. I'm a senior consultant at Egremont Group. It's my pleasure to be moderating the discussion today. And this webinar is hosted by Egremont Group and in partnership with Airport World. And this forms part of our wider AI in Airports initiative. So a brief bit about AI in Airports is a growing industry initiative that's bringing together airport leaders, technology experts, and innovators to explore how AI, artificial intelligence, is reshaping airports. And this webinar today is building on the conversations that we've been having through the AI in Airports initiative already, and marks the next step on the journey towards this year's AI in Airports Summit, which is taking place on the 1st and 2nd of December. Our ambition with this is simple, really. AI has leapt upon us from a practical perspective, and what we're aiming to do is bring the industry together to share practical experience and accelerate the responsible adoption of AI across airports, improving life for all of us that work within airports and all of our passengers as well. Over the last few years, AI has become one of the biggest topics in aviation. It's probably what most of us talk about almost on a daily basis, to some extent. But the conversation now is shifting. Leaders are no longer asking, what is AI? What is it not? How does it work? We're much more asking practical questions around where is AI creating value? What does it take to implement successfully? And how do we move beyond pilots and into operational delivery? And those questions are exactly the questions that we are going to explore today. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. So the session will run for approximately an hour, and we'll spend about 30 minutes in discussion with Maurice and Sharon, followed by hopefully 20 minutes of audience Q&A. Please submit your questions through the Q&A function, which you should see on Teams. Feel free to do so at any point throughout the session. And it's only in those last sort of 20 minutes when we've concluded the core discussion that we'll work through those, just to allow a full, proper, detailed discussion and then more dedicated time on the questions itself. To help us keep the session running smoothly, I do ask if you please don't use the raise hand feature. Please put any questions in the Q&A box, and if you have any technical issues, please use the chat function. And finally, today's webinar is being recorded, so we will share the recording with everyone. So no need to take notes or to try and capture anything. We will give you the raw video footage so that you can watch until your heart's content. Additionally, we'll also provide a written overview as well. Just looking through the chat, and we've got an extremely international audience, which is great. So hello to everyone. It's a true representation of how international our industry really is. So I'm delighted to introduce our speakers. And our first speaker is Maurice Jenkins, the Chief Innovation Officer at Miami International Airport. Maurice, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. We're really happy to have you here. And perhaps you could briefly introduce yourself to everyone and tell us a little bit about your role and your experience, please.
Nick, it's always a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here, and good day, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, based upon what part of the world you're in. Maurice Jenkins, I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for Miami International Airport. I'm former CIO, so ran IT and telecom. So within the innovation framework, you really get an opportunity to take a different set of eyes and perspective in regards to where innovation sits into the framework of this ecosystem of ours of air transport. From a dynamic industry perspective that's moving 4 billion plus people a year globally, that is expected to double over the next 5 to 10 years. The question comes into play, how efficiently and how effectively can we do that? We realize traditional brick and mortar works very well, but traditional brick and mortar could only take you but so far. So the question comes into play, how do we leverage technology? How do we create and be more innovative to improve our business processes within our airport ecosystem. So my charge or my challenge for what I do for my airport and other board engagements around the world is looking at how we can establish enhanced frameworks of leveraging technology, innovation into an operational environment to create better efficiencies, right, and business process improvements. So within us for the airport in Miami, we're doing a good amount of things and we're creating some frameworks for that. And I'm looking forward to having this conversation and discussion with you all today. So it truly is a pleasure to be here. And I look forward for the next hour of engagement.
Thank you, Maurice. And I'm also delighted to introduce Sharon Prior. Sharon is the founder and chief executive officer of Innovivo Group and the former chief information officer at Heathrow Airport. Sharon, welcome. And just like Maurice did, if you wouldn't mind just giving us an introduction to yourself, please.
Sure. Thank you, Nick. And lovely to be on this call. I'm always excited when I'm talking about tech because this year marks my 40th anniversary in the tech industry. So I've worked across all of the major tech transformations there has been in our lifetime. Started off with PCs entering the workplace, and I was at a bank, what is now HSBC in London. I then moved into pharmaceuticals and worked for GlaxoSmithKline for over 11 years, and that was all about e-business. I then went on and worked for a major logistics organisation, Wolseley and Ferguson, and that was all around business intelligence and data. And now we're at the inception of AI. So I've seen a full spectrum of technology evolution. Last year, I made a now or never decision to go out on my own, become an entrepreneur and create a company and a boutique AI native transformation firm operating between the UK in London and the UAE in Dubai. And it was based on my experience of working in industry that I came to realize the transformation across all of the industries I've worked in, and I've worked in many industries, and also public and private sector, all share the same common challenge, and that's around how to make decisions on tech as it starts to evolve. E-business was the first insight into this in the early 2000s, that business started to get really interested in tech, and it's just grown exponentially since then. AI is no different. And my tenure at Heathrow Airport taught me a lot around decision making, but also the benefit that AI can bring to the way organizations operate. So I now specialize in AI native, as I say, transformation, but also how to build in an operating model that will help organizations utilize AI. That's it. We can get more into it.
Super. Thank you, Sharon, and welcome. So we've got a great number of people who have joined us. Everyone, thank you for being here. And I say, let's get going on the discussion. So to help keep our discussion sort of practical and focused on the right topics, we've set out a couple of questions that we're going to work through. This includes, where is AI delivering value today in airports? What it really takes organisationally to make AI work? How airports can move from pilots and experimentation to scaled delivery? And finally, what should airport leaders be prioritising over the next 12 to 24 months? So let's begin with our first question. And I will go to Maurice first of all. Maurice, where are you seeing the clearest examples of AI delivering genuine operational or commercial value within airport environments today?
Great question, Nick. And I look at it, we realize several factors that, to me, AI is already creating value. But I look at it mostly in operational decision making. AI has been around, and you've leveraged it in doing various decision making processes. But I would think, rather than focusing on what I call futuristic examples and placing an emphasis on strong values that come out of helping airports become more predictive. So we've always looked at the fact of airports itself, and I put the focus and the emphasis on air transport, is we're mostly have always been in a reactive environment, and how well do we react and respond? But how do we get from being reactive to better predictability or more predictive to the point where we can have more efficient planning? And I think that's where we as an airport, we as an industry need to go. So if I give you some MIA examples of looking at predicting passenger flows before congestion occurs, right? So we always look at capacity and demand. We build for capacity, but once we get to the point where we have too much demand or demand exceeds capacity, and Sharon can attest, what we have is what we call anarchy within our air transport ecosystem, whether it's airside, landside, terminal, or airside, is how do we go ahead and get to be a little bit more predictive in that aspect so we can plan a little bit more efficiently, and anticipating operational disruptions and those irregular operations that we deal with by working on leveraging AI within this ecosystem to do more effective planning in regards to that, optimizing gate and stand utilization. So FYI, we're working with IAG right now, the guys from British Airways, on looking at some optimization in regards to aircraft turn and so forth, just to creating better operational efficiencies. They fly the A380 and the 777s into Miami. But how well can we optimize that level of utilization, tying that with sensors and enhance better reliability and better predictive maintenance? And I look at it from a standpoint of what is it like to be on a 10-hour flight coming from Heathrow to Miami, and that hard stand space, that gate is not available due to downtime. Well, we had the opportunity of adding sensors and monitoring and generating the data, and we could examine mean time for failure, right? So the journey is great, but all of a sudden the journey ends at this stage, and now we have a disruption or unhappy passenger that now impacts operational flow, that impacts business, that impacts spend and customer experience and customer satisfaction. So I apply it to supporting the frontline staff with giving them better information, more asset reliability of how best I can sweat my assets, optimizing gates, operational disruptions. These are the things that we're doing in Miami. This is how we're looking at AI to create value. And we're not just looking at standard commercial AI and getting more to generative. It's more into the agentic AI space is where we're looking to go. But I think the biggest opportunity isn't just creating what I call a smart airport, but I want to create a predictive airport. I want to be able to sweat the assets and leverage our infrastructure more to go ahead and provide better value-added resources and opportunities for our airport ecosystem, for my airport.
Brilliant. Thank you, Maurice. So what I'm hearing is really, is not to say that AI is or is not sort of creating value and focusing on where it's not. It's more identifying that there's a real shift here where historically we've always been reactive. It's always been reacting to problems and challenges. And AI is unlocking the ability to get ahead of that curve and to be smarter in how we operate and sort of respond by having better foresight over what's coming our way. And Maurice, is there, because I'm conscious, there's many ways that we can take that shift across the airport ecosystem. Is there a particular operational area where you think that there is a starting point or the most amount of value or the key problem to solve? I know, things like aircraft turnaround is something that a lot of investment is focusing on, but curious to hear your perspectives on that.
It's a combination thereof, to be honest with you. I subscribe to 3 principles. So if I'm leveraging technology and I'm looking at this AI framework, it's how can I create better operational efficiencies? So within that is how best I can sweat my assets, right? I also look at it from a commercial standpoint. Can I leverage this opportunity within the commercial space as well to enhance revenue generation and better optimization? And how well can I leverage this to enhance our customer/user experience? So if I'm allowed to go ahead and just run into 3 different verticals with you real quick. Mm-hmm. We ran something on the commercial space, working with a vendor and looking at some AI and data modeling. And we used one of our stores in our concession spaces And I think it was duty free that we leveraged. And we ran some models leveraging sensors and data, and we aggregated that because you don't know what you don't know. But based upon that, if I were to ask your audience, I know they couldn't respond right now, but in duty free, what was the most sold item in duty free and coming out of Miami? So traditionally, most people would probably say alcohol or perfume or certain things. Didn't realize it was cigarettes. It was Marlboro 100s. There were passengers going to France. The most used credit card was MasterCard. All of this is data that we're able, that you decision making and data that you didn't have before that you can now share with the concessionaire so you can actually restructure your brand. You can enhance your posture, you can enhance your revenue, and you can do better predictability. So now I could actually take that data, take that with my AOIS, FIDS, bids, and gets data and everything else and say, hey, if that is the case, should I work on maybe from a gate stamp perspective and availability, maybe put Air France closer to duty free rather than saying duty free is always here, but Air France is 18 gates away. Right? Now you could get better. So now this is where we start tying in data and do better predictability around that. And if I'm able to tie that to irregular ops and certain other things, it's like, wow. Now you're changing the business dynamic from the commercial side of the house, but it also has an operational impact on the user experience side of the house because you're catering to what the user's level of expectations are and you're monitoring their level of spend. Now I'm also able to tie that now for aircraft turnaround time and optimization and gate utilization, leveraging those sensors. Now I can actually do more performance metrics around that. And now I'm also taking in data from our security checkpoints. Now I can actually gauge that and tie that and says, well, I can gauge how many women between the age of X, Y, and Z go through this terminal based upon this time. Can I correlate that back to a concession? Can I tie it back to a restroom and tie that back to cleanliness and operational efficiencies? And now I'll have a larger ecosystem that I can work with. So there's those three verticals, and I try to tie those three verticals together, but I actually created business format around this airport ecosystem of mine of how I can actually put that together. So I'm in the process of working on generating and putting that together now.
Brilliant. And Sharon, does Maurice's view, does that resonate with you? I mean, is this what you're seeing across the wider industry, this sort of shift from the reactiveness to predictiveness and being able to predict what's ahead and what's coming our way?
Absolutely. I was just then nodding as Maurice was speaking because I couldn't have said it better myself. I think one of the benefits that I have in where I sit today is the fact that I have worked across very many industries, as I explained before, whether it's retail, financial services, pharmaceutical, banking, and airport operations. The benefit of having worked across very many industries, you start to be able to join the dots very, very quickly. And irrespective of the industry, so whether it's you're running an airport, you're running an airline, your ground service, whatever the aspect that you have, the issues are still all the same. And what I'm seeing, and I've had a number of conversations with airports over the last 6 months, the strongest use cases are emerging where structured data already exists. And that is a key thing. 80% of AI is data. And, we underestimate the actual value of data that is collected in the airline industry, or the aviation industry, and with airports. There is huge amounts of data. And Maurice's example about just drilling into data about the highest retailing product in duty free is actually gives you a lot of insight, and also gives a lot of it informs a lot of the ways decisions can be made. So if I think about where you have repeatable decision cycles on things like passenger flow, baggage system optimizations, predictive maintenance, as Maurice talked about earlier, especially where it's on critical infrastructure. These are not glamorous things. This is just the price of running an airport. but they compound over time. And the fact that you can gather data, I think, is a key point. I think the component where I feel is more undertreated is that the airports that I've spoken to, and certainly in my experience at Heathrow, the focus is on technology selection. And I was having a conversation with a Middle Eastern, the GCC, sorry, airport, a major airport, about a decision to change their ACDM. And they're talking about the tech and what facilities that tech needed to have. What they weren't really thinking about was how the data was going to flow between all the major actors, whether it was capacity planning, whether it is airport central ops or technology, how data actually flows. Once we started to get into that conversation, the outcome completely changed. So I think it's really important that, for the listeners here, they've got to really think through what data do we have? Where is it repeatable? Where are the cycles repeatable? What is it we actually need to know? And almost sit down and map out the flow of information between all of the major parties. That's really where I see the best use cases are starting to emerge. Is that really forensic view on data flow between functions. Almost forget the tech for now, but just think that through first.
And it's an interesting space now, because there's an interesting comment from Sarah Proctor in the chat talking about how it's, the predictive approach is where AI is taking us, it's enabling us, but actually this is something that machine learning can do as well. And a real opportunity ahead is the prescriptive nature, where it's not just about, warning signs of what's to come and what's ahead, but it's also advising on the best next steps or the best protocol to respond to situations. So it really is edging into this very smart, very assisted, agentic environment that we're functioning in.
Yeah, but it only really works. A model that predicts, for example, a security surge on a queue is only useful if the operational team trusts the output and has a protocol to act on it. If those two things don't exist, then being able to predict isn't very useful. You have to be able to have a team that trusts the output and also has protocols to act on it.
You're 100% correct when you look at that, Sharon. And Nick, I think the audience needs to, I guess they understand and know from an engagement perspective is you still need to have that human in the middle. Data is great, but data has no value unless it's shared. So everyone's saying, while data is king and data is worth more than gold and oil and every other resource sitting out there, unshared data, structured or not, has no value unless it's ingested and it's being used in the ecosystem. So from a trust factor perspective, having that human in the middle as you're generating this data and it's being evaluated and being vetted properly, maybe you containerize it first before you open it up to look at the level of validity and trust. And once you're able to create that trust factor in there, then the ingestion piece starts to improve. The adoption level can increase and go forward as well. I think Sarah she can attest to that also. I mean, this is just the direction that we need to take. If not, a great application that doesn't have that good level of adoption and engagement is an application that just failed.
I think, Sharon, you mentioned something as well, and Maurice, you've been referring to it, around the importance of not forgetting the human in all of this. We've almost been programmed to assume that overnight we'll wake up and robots will be leading decisions in everything we do, handing our toothbrush to us in the mornings and orchestrating aircraft turnaround. But the people component is really important. And I think this links very nicely to the second question, which is, what does it take organisationally to make AI work? So, Sharon, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on when an airport is moving from AI, a concept or an idea, and they're transitioning towards some form of implementation. What do leadership most commonly underestimate? You know, what are those factors that often do go sort of unexplored or undiscussed?
Yeah, I had a really deep debate last week with a group of execs at a forum that I was speaking at last week. The key thing I will say, and you know, coming from a tech background and having been a CIO and now running my business, AI is not a technology initiative. That's the first thing that has to be said. And I know a lot of CIOs and CTOs, it is the new thing. It is a great capability. It enables a lot of businesses to really perform much better than they currently do. But it has to be taken out of it being an IT-led initiative. This is a transformation agenda, and it sits at the heart of the top of the organization. And where I see that the AI sits almost exclusively in the technology function, it stays small. Not because people don't see the value, but they're still doing their day jobs. They're still thinking in the way they've always thought. They're still operating in terms of the operating model in the same way they've always operated. This needs to sit with the COO or the CEO and co-sponsor the program alongside the CIO, the CTO, the CDO. Those are the ones I see getting the best results when there is this co-founder, almost co-sponsorship of a program. And what I see that leaders really do underestimate, we've talked about this, is the data architecture readiness of the organization. You know, as I said before, 80% of AI is data. And if the data estate is fragmented, poorly governed, or just locked away in legacy systems, no amount of AI tooling will actually produce any value. So leaders need to invest in the boring stuff. The boring, you know, and this is really where the CIO and the CTO come in, the infrastructure work before the exciting model work. That needs to happen, and it's all about data. And it's all about people, who's actually going to lead and how they lead. But the other element of it, so alongside data, on the flip side of that coin is governance. And again, I've seen the legal teams, the compliance teams, the cybersecurity, you know, the CISO, all talking about the governance that needs to sit around AI. And that has translated in how people have landed it into bureaucracy. But that isn't the case. And again, the conversation last week was on the taking the analogy of Formula One. So those who follow Formula One racing, which we do a lot in Europe, in Vienna, there was a Formula One meet over the weekend, and we were having conversations about the analogy of a Formula One car is built for speed. You don't have to make a decision between speed and safety. It's just inherent in the build of how it is done. And governance is almost the same. The ability for companies to really put AI in and have teams of people make decisions on it, there has to be guardrails around how you do that. But those guardrails are the brakes that if needed, you can put those brakes on. The same way you can speed into corners in a Formula One racetrack because you know your brakes will save you if anything goes wrong. It's the same way we need to think about governance. So for me, the whole aspect, and this is probably around operating model, but you've really got to think about data and who owns the data, governance and what that actually means as an organization, and some clarity around the outcome. So who owns the outcome? How are you measuring it? What's the escalation path look like? And when something happens that's unexpected in a live operational environment, how are you going to handle that? So, in summary, I think I will state that for airports specifically, because it is a live operational environment, airports can't afford to experiment in the same way a software company can. I'm talking to, various industries, and some people's risk appetite is through the roof. And I'm thinking I would, never have been able to do this in some of the businesses I've worked in, but it can work here. So you've got to really think through in a live operational environment like an airport. You can't be expected, and you can't afford to experiment in the same way that others can. But consequences, the safety critical and the regulated aspect, if you get the data, the governance, the ownership, and the operating model right, it will enable organizations to really move fast on that. But airports are notoriously slow in this space. So I think that there is a model that can work for airports, but at the moment it won't be on that fast track.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Sharon. And Maurice, I think Sharon's painting that picture around the importance, of leadership, governance, ownership, and the operating model. And I'm itching to know, how does this compare with your experience, either currently or previously?
I think every point you hit 100% on the head. I say this a lot, especially in a lot of my speaking engagements. This is 2026, right? And we still conduct business in this industry like it was still 1965. Right? You still have your passport, you still have your driver's license, you still have your boarding pass, whether it's paper or on your mobile device. We have not improved efficiencies. We're quick to say that we want to be agile, but we're slow to adopt. And I think that's what Sharon is outlining in regards to where that is. What I do like, however, at times is having an airport environment, and I call this big petri dish. When I'm able to do pilots in an airport environment, the sample size is a little bit larger, and I'm using that with real data. So when I evaluate it based upon that, I can look at the difference in the results set, especially when you're working with a startup within here. But I realize when we look at this in regards to AI, you need good governance, you need good guardrails. Like with any IT system that you're going to implement and the human capital portion, the problems that come into play when people are looking at AI and you want governance is the problem reference AI, or is it just having an understanding of looking at data, processes, and adoption? Because I think where the fear comes into play is getting the adoption in, and how do we work towards making that happen? And I think that one of the primary factors we need to look at as well is technology is advancing faster now than organizational change compared to how it has been. When we looked at technology and we looked at IT systems from an implementation perspective, lifespan was what, 3 to 5 years, Sharon, somewhere around there. Now you're looking at 6 months to a year, and then you reach functional obsolescence. So now it's a different dynamic of how you put value add into what you're developing and what you're implementing to drop into an ecosystem, and how do you make that work? Another key component that's critical, it's our operational business units, and not just IT, are critical and essential, as Sharon said, to own a successful AI program. Not having that level of engagement, whether it's airside, landside, terminal, security, ops, the EOC, finance, because we're looking at all of these venues, not making that happen becomes a challenge. And if you look at it, it's to have a successful deployment, depends on who you're working with. To me, the hardest work isn't just building the model, it's integrating that capability into your daily operational decision-making workflow to make that work. So we've gone from doing pilots and looking at certain facets, working on an AI governance model. Finally, we got to working on recently, we've published some surveys out to our user community. And basically, what is your thought process on AI? I need to get a finger on the pulse in regards to what the thoughts are. Are you affecting my job? Why is it so late to being implemented into the ecosystem? What's the intended purpose? Is Big Brother whatever the mindset responsiveness is for our staff allows us to have a better understanding and framework of how we need to look at creating a governance model around AI, and how do we start to work on being able to deploy it into the ecosystem to show the value. And we're going away from pilots into real live scenarios of adoption and leveraging AI agent-based applications into the workforce. And I think that's the direction that we've opted to take. I think industry needs to look at to ensure that it's done methodically, it's done gracefully, with a full level of inclusion from the beginning of this process all the way through.
Thank you, Maurice, and thank you for doing such an excellent job at naturally transitioning us into our third question. So that's that's great, and I'm sure a lot of our attendees are wondering as well. We've started to discuss around that transition from pilots to scaled delivery, and what we're seeing now, and I'm sure many of us see on a daily basis on LinkedIn, a new announcement about something new that's come forward. Maurice, if you were to summarize, what you were just saying and any additional thoughts you've got, what do you think it is that separates initiatives that do gain traction and those that remain an isolated proof of concept?
The biggest thing is proof of concepts. We need to go from those into more operational deployments that we can scale. I think to get to that level, one, and I look at it 5 aspects again, it's clear business ownership. Who owns it? Where are my stakeholders? What's the intent? What's the desired outcome? And can I also generate an ROI around it in some capacity? It has to be defined, right? I always say you can't manage what you can't measure. It needs to be measurable to make it efficient, to make it effective. So these outcomes, to be able to have measurable outcomes. At the end of the day, also we need strong data foundations. We talked about leveraging data and where the data sits, whether it's structured or unstructured, and being able to aggregate as much data as possible to look at creating that usefulness within our ecosystem and our environment. Good governance. Governance is key. Has to be. But primarily is also integration into our operational workflows. We can't sit back now and start working on creating applications and putting systems in place that sit out there in some disparate world island somewhere, but it's not truly being able to be leveraged into an airport operational environment. I think we're doing ourselves a disservice by not being able to do so. So primarily getting out of pilots. We all understand we've done AI pilots. We understand AI's capabilities. Let's go from pilots to applications that we can now scale, that are also measurable. And then with that, you get that first test bed with an executive sponsor. It should not be the innovation unit driving it. We're the facilitators, or IT driving it. We're the facilitators, but that executive sponsor should be the owner of that as well and working lockstep. I'll give you one case in point. We're working on an environmental project right now. And with that, being able to take all of this environmental data, which is mounds and mounds of data, drawings, PDFs, data in regards to what goes on environmentally within an airport, and we're ingesting all of that. The turnaround time to generate information, if you wanted to know about an environmental process or project at the airport, can take you days, if not weeks. We ran an initial pilot, and I won't use the word pilot anymore. We're able to generate some of that response time and now in minutes. So if I'm able to aggregate all of this data properly and leveraging that within the AI environment, imagine being able to turn around and data and reporting in minutes or in a day rather than weeks. The efficiencies are truly measurable. And if our business unit can see that value, and they've already started to see that, it's the impetus of future things to follow that we can actually add additional pieces onto this, so to speak, and grow this into this airport environment of ours.
So it sounds like, and I think something that stood out from this conversation in its entirety is we're past the point now where scaling is seen as a technology challenge. We've got confidence in what it can do and should be able to do. It seems it's more of an organizational and operational challenge around the management frameworks that are in place around an initiative and a program. Sharon, is that a pattern that you're seeing more broadly as well?
Yeah, it's interesting. As you're talking, and Maurice has given some really great examples. It's bringing up conversations I've been having almost on the increase over the last 3 months with with various types of organisations, including the same major airport operator. The big aspects for me around all of this, and whether you are an airport or whether you're a retailer or a financial services company, it is the same principle. So AI is no different, really no different to an organisation looking at how they operate and how they can use tooling capabilities to improve operations. What most companies miss is knowing exactly how it is they operate. And I can't tell you the amount of times I've walked into businesses that have no real understanding of their as is. So how are we currently structured? You know, how are things, how are processes operating? What's our operating model around it? Where do decisions get made? This is what I call the architecture of how an organization is structured. Architecture has been given quite a dirty word in the realms of transformations, because it's almost seen as enterprise architecture. That sits with the CTO, and it's always, you know, the machine says no, we can't do things because it doesn't fit within this architectural design. Architecture for AI is a very important step. So you have to actually have a really clear view on how the organization is structured. So I use the analogy of, you know, renovating a stately home that you own, and you just walk in with sledgehammers and start knocking down walls without really understanding how the house is, or how the building is actually constructed. It's the same with any business. You have to, before you make any changes, you have to understand the structure of the business. And the same applies to AI. So my advice is always, before you even scale a pilot, you need a really clear picture of the operating model it sits within. The data that flows between it as well is really key, and the integration points of existing systems. So how the systems actually support it. What I've seen over the last few years is airports tend to celebrate pilots far too quickly. And the reason I say that is because when you have a successful pilot or successful proof of concept in a sandbox environment with really clean data, engaged stakeholders, it tells you very little about what happens at scale. Certainly across shifts, across staff turnover, in degrading operating conditions. So the gap between it works in the lab and it works at 4 a.m. on a bank holiday Monday is where I see most AI programs stalled. So my advice really is that sequencing absolutely matters. You have to start with use cases where you have the strongest data foundation and the clearest line to a measurable operational outcome. You build the confidence, you build the capability, and then you expand. You don't try to do 10 things at once. That would be my strong advice.
It's
Super.
And it's funny when we talk about some of those things. It's from the old IT environment. Sharon, I think we call that scope creep.
Yeah.
And and I don't think it's any different from the challenges that we face within the AI framework space today. Operationally, it's even in a close structured environment, it's like being in university, right? You know what the desired outcome is. So you can create that simulation, but we preface that to our user community. It's like, in this environment, this is what our expectations were. There are variables that we did not consider, right? We didn't take into consideration irregular ops. We didn't take into consideration that our passenger flow increased by 22% last year. We didn't factor in our aircraft movements in Heathrow. 1,200 flights a day is going to go up to 1,300 a day, and it's time for us to go ahead and revamp our runway and our apron space for optimization. There's some variables that you didn't consider, or even in Miami, that, wait a minute, this wasn't part of our use case test environment. Then when you implement that, and we didn't factor those things, and all of a sudden now it doesn't work. Now the adoption just went away. So 100%, these are the factors when we look at it. We preface it that this is a closed case environment. This is what we expected. So it's plausible. Now we need to start ingesting some additional variance values to see what the outcome looks like. So from a better understanding perspective, which enhances the adoption perspective.
Super. And I think this leads on to our sort of final question 4, if you like. We've got some great questions coming through, so keen to ensure we have some time for that. But Sharon, Maurice, if I could ask you to sort of summarize what your thinking is around this, what should airport leaders prioritize over the next 12 to 24 months? So Sharon, if you were advising an airport leadership later today, what would your top priorities be?
Yeah, what I say all the time, first get the data house in order. And I don't mean a multi-year data transformation program, but you have to have a targeted piece of work on 2 or 3 data domains that underpin the highest value AI use case. That has to be the first thing to be done. Second thing is, and we haven't really touched a lot on this, but this is all about people as well and operating model. So the second point for me is invest in the operating model change. So not just the tech. And that means all of the training, the change management, revised roles and responsibilities, and have some clarity around the accountability of AI-driven decisions and what that actually means. People have to be able to see it. There has to be complete transparency there. And lastly, third would be build a very small cross-functional team that owns the AI agenda end to end. So not just in technology, it's got to be a fusion team of technologists, operators, and commercial sitting together. And again, not a center of excellence that writes papers, but a very small SWAT team that actually delivers something and ships the outcomes. Those would be my main 3 things to do.
Thank you, Sharon. And Maurice, what would your recommendations be to some counterparts at another airport or the leadership team of your airport?
I like Sharon's philosophy of creating a program management team as a task force to go after AI initiatives. But I think over the next 24 months, and to some level of specificity, is the strongest things I could actually recommend is look at, I would say, what we call small operational problems and solve them exceptionally well. Let's do a great job on looking at that. So make sure it's something that's tangible, that's truly attainable. And look at that to scale. I'm looking at 5 verticals right now, and I think it's critical from what I've seen in my counterparts in airports around the world. And a lot of people are looking at creating operations control centers. So let's look at building some intelligence within that. Passenger flow forecasting is critical as our industry is growing. A tendency, I've sat in conversations over the last 6-7 months. When we came out of COVID, the one thing that truly satisfied or saved this industry as much as possible was cargo. But we're not talking about cargo. So I want to put a little bit more of a core emphasis in cargo and cargo analytics, and looking at some of that data and helping to look at more predictability and manageability of leveraging AI within the cargo space as well, because I think that's tangible. More on the predictive maintenance, right? So we want to be more proactive with if we can be more predictive in regards to how well we sweat our assets. So mean time for failure, mean time to repair, it's a little bit more enhanced, which means you get to manage your resources a little better. The finance folks will love it. And rather we didn't talk about finance looping in the finance people is to show what the benefits are, leveraging these types of opportunities, whether it's just dealing with a traditional operating budget or a capital budget or your reserve maintenance budget, but you want to make sure that you can manage those assets and resources more efficiently. And as Sharon alluded to earlier, workforce productivity is key and critical. So those are my top 5 verticals. that I would say over the next 24 months that we could focus on. Look at small projects, make sure that they're tangible, that they're attainable, and you can create those successes around that as you move forward. So over the next 24 months, I will look at those five. Those are 5 items, 5 areas that really touches the entire airport ecosystem, which I think you can see manageable, tangible results out of.
Thank you, Maurice. Thank you, Sharon. I think there's been a very interesting theme from this discussion, which is how we need to think bigger than the technology itself and really recognize this as something that should be a priority for the entire organization, not, as tech has historically been parked with the tech team and it stays with the tech team. It's thinking bigger and wider than we ever have before. And in doing so, that's where we can edge closer to unlocking that greater value than more isolated dynamics. Maurice, Sharon, I'm keen to pull on a few of the questions that are coming through over the last sort of 7 minutes or so. So we've got some great questions and lots of football chat I noticed in the chat as well, which we can reserve for another time.
Yeah, sorry, Germany.
And sorry, Netherlands as well, but let me down.
There's an interesting question here that's come in from Brahim Lakhlifi. And Brahim's asking, hello from Casablanca. Hello, Brahim. Given that AI depends so heavily on data collection, how can we ensure that all concerned airport stakeholders are sharing the correct needed data in a timely fashion to ensure smooth operations? I think that's a very valuable question because that's an ancient problem to get stakeholder alignment. Sharon, what are your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, interestingly, data is very different to information because data can be in its raw form, but it's what you do and how you interpret that data is what makes it valuable. And again, I go back to architecture because it's a real emphasis that I have with organizations. You have to architect your environment. So you start with your business architecture, how your business is constructed, how the operating model looks from the business perspective. You then overlay that with your application architecture, so the systems that actually support all of those business capabilities. And you then look at what data sits on those applications. And then the final piece is how that data is integrated. So you can have a piece of data being generated from one system. It then gets extracted on a spreadsheet and doesn't look anything like what it originally meant to be. So you're not comparing apples with apples. So you have to really have a really clear view on your architectural layer between the business, the apps, the data, and the integration points, and then how data flows between the organizations. Without that view, it's very, very difficult to try and determine whether my data is better than your data, because it's being generated and being used for different purposes. So you have to get much better at using data as an asset for an organization, not just as the end product of it being stored in a tool.
Thank you, Sharon. And Maurice, what are your thoughts?
100%. I look at it that we need to get to a point of, if we could eliminate the silos, especially some of the data silos that we have in organizations. So, I mean, for us, we're creating what's called a common data environment. I am actually looking at all of the business units and the data that they generate and the sources of that data, being able to realize at times that if there's significant overlap, who's the rightful owner in regards to ensuring that the data that's being inputted, so to speak, is true, accurate, and good empirical data that can be used across the ecosystem. So creating a common data environment, so therefore we have that data layer that's established, looking at where the overlaps are within the business units and looking to collapse that. Because as Sharon said, if I export that data into a spreadsheet, it's not the data that I once had. So I want one instance of the truth, and then therefore it can be shared across the airport ecosystem. So we're actually working on collapsing that today. And once we're doing that, we'll have common data environment, common nomenclature. So now I know what I'm actually working with, given how we're dealing with it today, which creates those types of problems that she's talking about. So that's the vision. That's the goal that I'm doing with my team. And we're sitting with our executives today that we will be deep diving into business units and how data is captured, where the data sources come from, how reliable is that data, and then flush all of that out.
Mhm. Super. And another interesting question that's come through, and I think particularly interesting given yourselves being our speakers, is from Andy Entrikin, who is asking, how do you go about getting IT to relinquish or at least share the driver's seat? I can see Sharon smiling there. In my experience, they've been accustomed to being the sole driver of any initiative that has anything to do with tech.
I think
we'll make that the last question and then do a wrap up. Just for your note, Sharon and Maurice.
Yeah, I interesting reason I was smiling because I did a talk last year about the role of the CIO in an AI world. What does that look like? The tech role in the C-suite has been the most fragmented of all the C-suite roles. You never see a CFO having someone else at the exec table who has responsibility for finance. It sits solely with the CFO. The same with HR. People sits purely with the HR lead. In IT, it's the most fragmented. You have a CTO, a CDO, a CIO. Everyone wants to own tech because it is the shiny new thing. It's the thing that is evolving. What organizations need to really start to think through is breaking down those silos of ownership of capability like tech, because everyone should be responsible for tech innovation in their functions. Everyone should be thinking about tech in their functions. So the only way to relinquish it is really to look at the operating model around how work gets done and what guardrails the CIO needs to put in place to ensure that people can create their own tech environments.
Thank you, Sharon. And Maurice, before we wrap up, do you have any final comments on that point from Sharon?
From a manageability perspective, we realized back in the days it was, treat IT like Mikey, give it to him, he'll eat it, right? Because no one wanted to take the responsibility. So IT went out there, took ownership, not because they wanted to, because they had to be able to, in order to go ahead and move business processes downstream. So whether you're the CIO, the CISO, in regards to this data management, data aggregation, I don't mind where it sits. But I look at it, I would say democratize AI and innovation. You want to get to the point where you're engaging technology in the airport operating ecosystem and encouraging that with the user community. Just from a data management perspective, the CIO's responsibility is one to keep you safe and secure. All it takes is one hack, right? The bad guys get an opportunity to get it right one time. You have to ensure that they never get it right. So there's stresses that sit on the CIO's head or the CISO's head or anyone that realms within the IT arena. I need to keep my data safe, need to keep it secure, but also make it readily available and also create new innovations or new opportunities to enhance the business. So the CIO has a challenge to begin with. And the larger the ecosystem, the larger the challenge. So being able to say data is available. How do you want to use it? How do we make it safe? How do we make it operable for you? And we're also looking at it not just in the desktop environments, also in the mobile environment as well. We didn't get an opportunity to jump into the mobile space. And this is key and critical for us. On top of that, it truly is a challenge. So the same way we as users want to work with HR, the same way we want to work with finance to establish budgets and justify, we should also have the ability to sit with the CIO and technology and outline what my strategic business needs are, and vice versa, be able to create that correlation to create efficiencies and actually work together seamlessly for a desired outcome. Because if not, you're going to look at it to the point, if you don't do that and don't do it well, all it takes is one piece of technology that may sit somewhere. And what you're going to do is actually start to, if you don't manage it well, start creating what I call shadow IT within your organizations. And we as former CIOs, we wanted to avoid that because it creates disruption in your business unit. And with that, you get anarchy, which is what you don't want.
Thank you, Maurice. And Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. Apologies, a bit of an abrupt stop, but it just shows how much there is to talk about and how long we could continue the discussion. Maurice and Sharon, thank you so much for sharing your experience and your insights. I hope it's certainly been valuable for myself, and I'm sure others in the audience have found the same. And thank you everyone who has joined us and contributed your thoughts, your questions, and the commentary around the football.
And can
hopefully
Nick,
yes,
can we capture all the questions that haven't been answered, and we can answer them offline?
Yes. So what we'll do is we will share the recording of this event, a sort of written up paper copy or documented copy, and we will try to respond to as many of these questions as we can in that. And additionally, if you'd like to continue the conversation, we'd be delighted to welcome you to the AI and Airport Summit, which will be taking place in December the 1st and 2nd this year in London. But we will be in touch, and who knows, maybe there'll be another webinar on the horizon. But thank you very much, everyone, and wishing a great rest of the day.